Accept. Okay, so thank you very much for taking part in the Diversity Awareness Week. It was basically events that was trying that we're currently having at the University of Sterling to raise awareness of the lack of the diversity, especially when it comes to academia, which interests us the more. So I want to just, if you would like to introduce yourself.
Right. My name is Toni Haastrup. I'm a senior lecturer in international politics in the Division of History, Heritage, and Politics at the University of Stirling.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So I really loved your work that you did. So I know that you're also like an executive committee member of the Women Also Know Stuff, and also a member of a lot of society, and especially like the around gender. And also before we dive into the main question of this session, it was important topic for me as well is intersectionality, especially when we're talking about inclusion and diversity, and especially when it comes to your academic career, because I don't, for how long have you been teaching?
Oh gosh. Well, I started university teaching in sort of 2005 in South Africa, and that was before I did my PhD. So, and then I started my PhD in 2007. So it's been a while, let's just say.
Yeah, so, so definitely okay. Because I was like, so in your long career, as a teaching, where do you think the aspects of your social and particular life, where were they an hindrance? Like, where do you, because it's not only raise the issue, when it comes to intersectionality, you can have different aspect playing. Where do you feel like this multitude of aspects might have maybe not in South Africa as a issue, but for example, coming in in countries like UK teaching, where do
Mhm.
you
Yeah. I mean, I don't, to be honest, I don't think that South Africa was necessarily exempt from that as well. I mean, given the unique history of South Africa as well. But I mean, I think, the point about intersectionality is important, but it's also a difficult question because, of course, intersectionality is more about the axis of oppression and how they sort of coalesce and impact a person based on certain identity characteristics, rather than the way that most people think about it, which is the other way around, that, it's your identity that is the source of the oppression itself. But I would say, there are these systems in place that then impact people in different ways. So thinking about class, nationality, for example, race, disability, perhaps ethnicity as well. And so, it's not necessarily a straight line. So I can say, for example, that as a, middle class, cis, heterosexual woman, there are certain situations in which, I seem to have the advantage. And certainly in terms of the power dynamics and hierarchy vis-a-vis, say, students, for example, I'm in a certain position of privilege and of power. But then, that doesn't negate the fact that I'm a Black immigrant woman who is living in Scotland. And those things can be happening at the same time. And if,
exactly?
I have this sense of something being wrong, it's really difficult to sort of then draw out, is this happening to me because I'm Black, or is this happening to me because I'm a woman? But because I'm someone who really thinks, although I do think, of course, there are people who are behind the structure, but there is something structural about the ways in which um, this sort of systems of oppression actually then result to impacting me. So what I tend to then do is, if I want to think about intersectionality in the context of academia, I want to look at the system. So I can tell you, for example, that whereas there might be certain things like, my personal chances of progression, for example, it's perhaps not too useful to just look at me, but to sort of think more broadly. What are the chances of progression for young Black women within the academy? The answer is not very good, right? is to sort of think about, who gets funded, what kind of research gets funded, what is the attainment gap among students, for example. I'm sure you've sort of seen this a wonderful, I wouldn't call it a campaign per se, but the fact that in the UK we have less than 40 Black women professors in the entirety of the UK. In the entirety of the UK, there are less than 200 Black professors in general. And I think there's sort of way less than 1,000 if you sort of think of all ethnic minorities put together. Now, this is an issue anyway, but it's a bit strange for a country that colonized half of the world, that had such a massive empire. And so you cannot sort of leave that or explain that away as, well, it's just, Black people don't want to be in the academy, or there are just not enough people applying for these jobs, or, because I look at. Sorry?
It's like it starts from the beginning.
Exactly. I look at the student numbers. I look at, again, thinking about student attainment. What do we think is what are the sort of standards of measurements that we're using? Do they not intrinsically have certain disadvantages in them? And maybe they do, maybe they don't. But these are the sort of fundamental questions that we should be asking. And so, when I look within the academy, for example, there's a lot of conversation, particularly around gender. And this is still a big issue. So, within political science and international relations in the UK, only 39% are women. In 2021.
Sorry, but when they talk about gender, is it always like categorized? Like, does it take in consideration Black women or trans women, or even like, or is it like considered like, are they heard? Because when it comes to like gender, for example, I'm always I don't know, I feel like it's too wide as a scope.
Yeah.
Like, not everybody have the same experiences.
Absolutely. I mean, from my perspective, I think a lot of the data that tends to come out around this is definitely doesn't consider intersectionality. So you might have data that is like, certain number of ethnic minority are in academia, a certain number of women are in academia, and the further breakdown might happen if there's like a certain distinct project, right? So the project that was looking specifically at Black women, that was funded by the union, by University College Union, was a really important one because it really started a conversation, suddenly started a conversation in my own field. But if you're looking at big organizations, so we should be asking the universities, is your data breakdown considering certain intersectional factors, right? So I want to know when we're talking, say within our own institution, and we just have a number for students who have an AROA, for example, for mental health reasons. And I don't think anybody has to sort of declare their status in any way, shape, or form. But I think it's also, given what we know about the impact of race on mental health, that research is out there for everyone to see. Should this also not be a consideration in sort of the ways in which we think about, say, mental health, and the ways in which we think about racism, as not just when someone says a bad word to you, but if you're in particular spaces that kind of reinforce your marginalization? Are we sort of having conversations about that? And I think, this would be the same for the entirety of academia, particularly in the UK. Are we having this sort of conversations? And I would say, yes, some universities are starting to have it, but for the most part, this is not the case.
Exactly. So if someone like doesn't necessarily believe in like saying, oh, they are teachers, or why are they so, because I always try to put myself in the other shoe and the other side, and I might think like the other side of the conversation might see it as like, why are they so keen on, this diversity in academia? Why did they wake up one day and decided this is such an important topic. So if you would like to, what would you say to someone, like, for example, do not see the value in, diversity in academia, or like just see it as people talking for talking's sake?
Well, I mean, I think again, I would accept that, that might be an easy, it's not easy, a difficult conversation to have. But I guess for me, I would always say, I want to know why you think that is something that we should not be talking about, because, when people start talking about diversity, they didn't just sort of roll out of bed one day and say, well, this is going to be my topic. It's because they feel like people like them are not being represented. It's because they feel like their needs are not being met. And if the other person on the other side of the argument can show the ways in which perspectives and their needs are being met, then yeah, we might be able to say that we don't need it. But the one thing I do want to highlight is that, the university and academia on the whole, we tend to narrate the university as being sort of this space that is intrinsically diverse because of what its purpose is. And so I would say, well, if we believe in that purpose of the university as an institution
Can you
of
hear me? I think
learning, of cosmopolitanism, then diversity shouldn't be something that, we're like, oh, should we or should we not be doing that? It should just be in there. But because we know that it's not just in there, then we should ask why. And the answer to the why is because, to a certain extent, the university is a microcosm of society at large. And all you have to do is, if you want evidence of that, take a step back and just look at the news that reports on our society at large in the last 7 days. And just imagine that if the university is supposed to be, it's an institution of society and a microcosm of society, then to what extent are some of those sensibilities being enacted within our own spaces? And that would be, I mean, in a sort of university setting, at least I've been really fortunate that people are very open to having different types of conversations. At the same time, I think, human beings, we tend to be quite resistant to change, and we tend to articulate that in a variety of ways. But by and large, I think most people are open to just having the conversation and articulating why this is the case, why we need to change certain things. So when I say, for example, that, despite the fact that a lot of the students that I'm teaching are women, but they're only 39% of the of staff, of academic staff in universities, in political science and IR departments around the UK are women. Then I think, that should be a conversation starter. Why is that the case?
so. Exactly. So it's a tangible thing that there's a lot of diversity in academia. Like, is it because when we talk about it, it always seems like it's an extreme, like either there are too many or like, there's none. But in your case, do you feel like it's an extreme or is in the middle? Like, to what to what extent is there like a lack?
Well, for me, I guess you could sort of say, I would say to a large extent, at least in terms of what I think what the university or academia should be like. So I said earlier, I sort of quoted some statistics that the UK has less than 200 Black professors. Of those, about 40 are women, less than 40. In my own discipline of political science, sorry?
40.
Yeah, 40, less than 40 Black women are professors in the whole of the UK. In my own discipline of politics and international relations, the last time I counted, there was only one woman who is in a political science department who's a Black woman. And as I've said, 39% of staff are women. And of those, most of them are in precarious or junior roles. So a lot of them don't have permanent jobs. We also know that women are more likely to leave the university because the structure and the architecture of the system doesn't really support them. And institutions are often unresponsive to minoritized identity categories, which makes academia just as marginalizing and alienating as society at large. And I would argue perhaps even more so because, it's so concentrated. And there's this idea that, once you get to a certain level, then everything should be fine. And we know that that's not the case. So I think there are habits in academia that actually perpetuate this kind of marginalization. We graduate PhD students, but we don't train them for anything else but academia. But then we don't have enough jobs for them, and we don't, have that conversation early on. We say people have to get funded to advance in terms of their career, even though we know that funding tends to go to people who are either more senior or people who are in the sort of majority racial class category. So, you're more likely to get funding as a white middle class, upper class man. We keep asking for more and more data, which we often minoritized individuals generate that data. And then we say, that's not enough. But the truth is actually the data has been there. The data is out there. There are lots of student groups, lots of charities that have been doing this work. We don't actually need more data. We just need people to do things. And the unwillingness to do that and the requirement to keep asking, for me, say something about academia. So I would, to answer your question, that, it is to a large extent, there is a massive problem. It doesn't mean that people don't just sort of tick along and sort of just get the job done. It's not necessarily something that, I talk about every single day. But the fact of the matter is that, this is a massive problem. I think, I've had students tell me consistently, I've taught in 3 institutions in the UK on full-time contracts, and that's aside from sort of summer schools that I might offer to colleagues who invite me. And often I'm the first and only Black lecturer that they will have. As I said earlier, in a country that has a certain history, this does not make sense. It's just not consistent with reality, and so, yeah, I would say this is a big issue.
So the question, which I think is at the end, the most important, what do you think are there like practical ways to, try to come around this issue? Like I would think more funding, but I don't necessarily think like that's the solution because, university makes quite a lot of money. So if we're really talking about funding, we should talk about putting the money in the right places.
Yeah, I agree. I think you're absolutely right. But in a way, we can still capture that by saying funding, right? So you're absolutely right, 100%, that universities make a lot of money, but where is that money going?
Exactly.
The one thing, I think you said to me in our correspondence about, trying to get a module going. But, I do worry about that because I worry about students doing this sort of work. At some point, you're going to graduate and you're going to leave us. And that's what we actually hope for. So what is then the legacy of some of these initiatives that, students put into place? To sort of think about things that are lasting, we should ask questions like, are we hiring Black, African, Caribbean, Asian staff, for example? And are we hiring the people who have the expertise and to an extent the lived experience to actually convene some of these modules that we know will be very popular? I would also say, the structure of the university as it exists can be quite constraining. And, there's something to say for most UK institutions, but I also think that each university can develop flexibility. So I'll use the example of what's going on in Edinburgh, for example. Over the last 4 years, they've devised 2 big university modules. One is on gender and sort of gender and society by large. And the most recent one, which was launched, I believe, last week, is around understanding race and racism. These modules are designed not to be within a particular division or a particular faculty. They are university-wide modules, which meant that they had to find a way around the ways in which we develop modules. And so there's a big question of, how many institutions are willing to do something like that? In order to develop those modules, the colleagues who were responsible for it, they were permanently staffed colleagues, they got funding from the University Central because the university recognized their specific expertise. outside of their everyday. By giving them money, it wasn't necessarily money that was coming into their pocket. It was money that was going in to buy their time, so that, you know, if they're going to do this important work of that we might call diversity work, that they're not also still working at 100% of like teaching classes. Are all institutions willing to do this? But fundamentally, you know, and this is what both Edinburgh and Glasgow have done, is an acknowledging that there's a problem in the first place. And this problem isn't just like, you know, a small problem, or once we have a strategy, we'll deal with it. But to sort of say, you know, this problem is embedded in histories of misogyny, sexism, racism, and colonialism, and that we create something like, it could be modules, it could be, you know, how we think about induction, whatever. And that whatever it is that we create is co-produced and co-owned. So it's not just students and the student union doing stuff, which has a high turnover and should have a high turnover. And students should actually be enjoying their time at university, but that we as an institution are actually investing in this because it's a good in of itself, not for PR, not for anything else. So I would say, I mean, I'm using two Scottish examples because they're quite close to home, that there are ways of doing things. But I think fundamentally, when you look at other universities like, you know, University College London, or right now in University College Cork in Ireland, there's a lot of investment in hiring Black and Brown staff who have expertise in this area. Because the problem is not a lack of expertise, it's the choices that we make that you know, you know, and I mean, don't get me wrong, universities have made mistakes. You know, I remember when Edinburgh hired its very first professor of Black, I think it was a professor of Black history, and it was a white woman. That sends the wrong message, because you're, I mean, clearly it's not that you're hiring the most qualified person, even though that person is eminently qualified. That is the choice that you're making. And I think, you know, if there are more institutions and more universities within the UK that are truly committed to more than their Black Lives Matter statements, and they're committed to it substantively, and they're getting the right people in the job, that we would actually see change.
Thank you very much. This was really insightful, and especially from, I didn't know so much data about it. So I think it was also like, you know, we're also showing the numbers. We're not just saying, you know, some thin air of like just, you know, personal experience, because, you know, our personal experience can be different, because, you know, and not everything is a monolith, but also coming with the numbers is really helpful and important, just to showing people. So I really thank you very much once again for joining this session. And hopefully, I'm not expecting a big change, but, you know, it's always important to start a conversation on, you know, when it comes to academia, because as you said, students eventually leave. So, you know, it's important that the institution, you know, as, you know, herself can contribute, and, you know, not just see the sports or the stuff like this, but also, you know, give students, or even talk about race, and not some, it shouldn't be something that it's uncomfortable for people to speak, because that's what I see most of the times, is like some things, even, you know, Black people don't really want to engage in that. But I think the problem is because you're not trying to engage in that. You can engage. To be honest, there's so much that I don't know. So that's why it was really important for me to have, you know, more knowledgeable people like you, just to like learn and see what the right says, because I don't know much, but at least I'm really passionate about starting a conversation, and from there, see where we can go. So yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
No problem.
Bye.
Wait, I think I should stop the recording. Okay.